so I've been on a bit of a bender, let's call it. I've gone through the games I've played multiple times before, wondering if my opinion is still the same years later, or will I appreciate them even more. So, Dishonored. I still recall watching TGS podcast and them bringing up trailers for upcoming games, and seeing Dishonored then, to playing it. I don't think I've ever been hyped for something only for the product to deliver exactly what was promised. It's shocking how rare that is, but Arcane gave it to me and I've been thinking about their games ever since. So back then I played it fully lethal, being the little angsty shit that I am, and the game actively admonished me for it. That was probably the best part. How many games out there try to spout the rhetoric of morals while having the player mow down hundreds of enemies without a second thought? Being evil felt evil, and that felt right. Quite frankly, I couldn't handle stealth, instead treating the game like a predator. Picking off enemies, and if any of them get alarmed, all the better. But it's about this roleplay of being an unseen threat, quickly dwindling the numbers as people panic. That was what I have adored. So years later I have replayed it, and just recently did so again, and I've definitely come to appreciate the nuance that comes with stealth and going non-lethal. I still believe that incapacitating enemies is a cheap, lazy, gamey way to go about things, but for the time being I didn't see a more complex and interesting system yet. And I've seen a lot more cracks at the seam as well. Great example of that being the physics. There are so many moments when the player climbs on top of something that has no right supporting their weight, yet it's steady as a rock. But aside from that, there is also the complexity to it. Immersive sims are seen as some of the most complex games out there, and it's all down to the way the levels are structured and how the problems are tackled. And sadly Dishonored doesn't offer that much flexibility, with my personal pet peeve being the lack of dialogue, infiltration, disguises and such. But there is more than that. Deus Ex, for example, offers ways to climb places with boxes, or creating cover with them, both for combat and stealth. Also obviously you can open up passages too. I recall so many times I've been annoyed by cameras in Deus Ex, but being too stingy to use multitools, so in came the boxes. It's kind of a staple of immersive sims. See, immersive sims and boxes, that's just how it goes. Yet Dishonored really had none. In fact, there is barely anything to interact with. Maybe some glass bottles for a distraction, but that's very bare bones. In addition, the level design screams console. Thankfully not a terrible console game, but it's clear that at times it was a struggle to port the game. Look at the bridge level. How many segments does that level have? And I don't believe there is an actual gameplay reason for it. Separating parts like that is fine to reduce loading time and all, but this was a little too much. And it bleeds into the levels themselves too. How many apartments are there with blocked doors available only by using Blink? How are there so few stairs? It was clearly designed to be fun to explore with Blink and double jump, but how are people in this world are actually supposed to get anywhere? I definitely wanted levels to be just a bit more complex, and there to be more apartments or some hidden little nooks with actual paths to them which don't involve using powers. Something that would make sense for enemies to traverse, because so often you can just get enemies to chase you when you go somewhere they can reach and they can't do literally anything. That's definitely a flaw. Also, I've always felt like chaos was a great idea, but not implemented strongly enough. Playing through it the first time I was baffled that the game actually acknowledged that I was a mass murderer. But going through it later, how much cooler would it be if there were assassins sent after a player if he gets too crazy? What if the tall boys appear during the second level if we blow up half the district? What if there was just a permanent alarm? There's so much more that could be done. I mean, look at the last level. It's so much crazier on high chaos over low one. But I just wish there was more. Everywhere. Anyway, I did realize that there is actually a huge difference in the flooded district. That's one of the things which chaos affects a lot. Survivors appear and the player can actually help them, even if it doesn't matter that much in the end. It's the kind of effect I like to see. I just wish there was more. And of course I'd like to point out that the DLC was pretty great, although I felt that it suffered from a few annoying choices, like the number of levels being a little too low, but the fact that there weren't really side objectives. The Granny's recipes are not complex enough to count. Besides, that didn't really have any effect on the story. It's simply a tool to gather runes. Prison especially was just a level which was begging for more. So many cells and not really anything to do with them. What if there were prison gangs? Or something interesting trapped there? Or who could someone interesting trapped there who could give some dialogue? Or, I don't know, something else. The prison just needed more. And I wasn't a fan of lengthy and skippable exposition at the start of each chapter of a DLC. It was at its worst when fighting Corvo. There's a lengthy talk and then going straight into that fight. On my maximum difficulty I've had to replay that a few times because I really wanted to win, and it was pretty annoying. So I would point out that back in the day Bridge was my favorite level, because of verticality mainly. Jumping off the top to stab a guy and not take any fall damage is still fresh in my mind, and I still think about that fondly. But playing through that level again definitely changed my opinion. And now probably the Flooded District is my favorite. With how huge it is, how much of it is optional, and the fact that it's probably the only place in the game where I've had to be on my toes with the roof, since assassins could blink around just like me. And I did hate Dunwall City Trials. Back then and right now, even when I actually can stealth through levels now, it's still kind of a chore. I really can't imagine anyone liking that. Great on Arcane for trying something different, but oh boy. Anyway, Dishonored 2. So originally I played as Corvo, full lethal, basically no stealth. I recall a door in the Clockwork Mansion because of how chaotic it felt. Levels randomly flipping, clockwork soldiers jumping out of the walls, Jindosh saying something condescending. It was wonderful. My second playthrough was as Emily going pure non-lethal. Still not stealthy, by the way. And I recall it being a complete joke. The way the first game worked was there were two ways to knock people out: stealth or sleeping darts. An alarmed couple of enemies were basically a brick wall. In the second game that got changed. Player can jump on top of the enemies, knock them out after a parry, or even knock them out if they react faster than the enemy. Also there are multiple types of darts, stun mines with 3 charges each, at a fairly decent range, and there are powers that can knock out multiple people as well. Although I've rejected the powers then, and so it was without the outsider. I remember distinctly not even trying to sneak. Just walking around the place, some guys get alarmed, I parry, knock their socks off, and stroll along to the objective. I still hold the opinion that they've made combat a complete joke. It's far too easy, both lethal and non-lethal. Block is far too powerful. And there's basically no incentive to actually kill anybody. With an upgrade, knocking people out is almost faster than killing. However, upon replaying the sequel again, I have realized other problems. So performance isn't great, moving on. I hated that originally, I still hate it. Performance is just not good. The game engine itself seems to be problematic. And not knowing enough about programming, I can only speculate, but I can clearly tell that it simply doesn't work as well as the first game did. Meaning the player can get stuck on the terrain or random doodads a lot more often. Or the blink would act in some unpredictable way, or the player would be unable to get through something that is supposed to be a path, or they fall off something that is supposed to work fine as a platform, or enemies clip through the player and the terrain. Also, Emily's version of Blink is downright horrendous, only climbing anything half the way, and usually falling off as it tries to grapple halfway up the wall. It only becomes usable with a time slow upgrade, interrupting the player's momentum. But even that isn't reliable. Also, because of that Blink-alike, I fell to my death more times than probably in the entirety of the first game. Autosaves is another problem. The idea is that saving is a process which can't be done multiple times in a row, or at the same time, etc, etc. So what the game does, it saves aggressively and often, and that blocks the quick saves. If you've played any stealth game or an immersive sim, then you've probably never even considered using autosaves, as quick saves are manually controlled, convenient and always available. But not here! I've had multiple times when there were minutes of progress erased because autosaves block my quick saves. At one point I've had 15-20 minutes of game time just gone because the game kept autosaving, but it didn't actually save once! And it still blocked my quick saves anyway. It was basically forcing an Iron Man game mode at me. Best example of that is the last level. The game kept lying to me about saving, and I clicked quick save at least 5 times at different intervals. Whatever. But the game still ended up going to that first quick save I made right after entering the level, the castle. Not once did quick save work after that. Hell, I'll even mention that I've had a power spike once. Boom, PC shut down. And that has erased my profile entirely. No backups, no recovery, just a broken save file. Forever. That is truly idiotic. It's the exact same kind of example of how the developer tries and update the system in place, which worked, but might not have been perfect. But they mess it up, so it ends up a million times worse than it was to begin with. The enemies are another problem. AI seems to be extremely problematic. They are both extremely smart and extremely dumb. They are smart when it comes to detection. I have finished the first game multiple times with Ghost on every single level. Maximum difficulty, of course. This isn't bragging. It's to explain what I can do stealth. No problem. I couldn't get Ghost in even a single level of the sequel. I've checked the post-game statistics, and the detection was always in double digits. But the problem is that the AI is also horrendous at actually doing anything about the detection. It's very easy to get spotted and hide. It's very easy to fight and beat the enemies. It's very easy to just lure them together and do some sort of AoE to get rid of them, or just blink past. And also, while trying to play a genocidal maniac, it's extremely easy to butcher half the level and have the other half sit there, sipping whiskey and puffing on cigars. No care in the world. They are shockingly deaf to anything happening in the level. But if you're trying to kill everybody, they will just be completely blind. Somehow. And also I would like to mention an anecdote. There's a level where witches appear. I think it was after clearing out the Clockwork Mansion. Just, you cleared out the level, you come back and they are there. So I've knocked everyone out beforehand, so I wasn't expecting to bump into them. And when I go for the extraction, I almost got detected. But I managed to hide just before being spotted. That is, until one of them randomly decided to blink right behind me on top of a platform and suddenly see me. Immediately. So I get up to her. She blinks back to the ground. So I crouch, thinking she'll leave me alone. Maybe she will stop detecting me. Only she suddenly blinks behind me again. Attacks me. Stumbles as I parry. And instantly falls to her death. That entire scenario, I think, perfectly encapsulates how well the sequel is made. There was also another time when I was fighting a guard, or attempting to. It really was him attempting to fight, because I wasn't moving. He seemed to have a significant problem with the stairs. I stood at the top, but he kind of walked halfway up, and then ran back down, angrily shouting at me all the while as he kept running in circles like that. After a few loops of that, I gave the poor fella a sleeping dart. And I just have to mention the absolute last fight with Delilah. So it happens within this area with a throne in the middle. I quickly got up to the top of a pillar on the right and just sat there. So, a pop-up appears to get rid of her doubles, and I decide to lure them out with a grenade. Just cook a grenade, throw it in the air, make a loud noise to draw them somewhere, because I couldn't actually see them. Everything is grey and they are just these small grey figures in the distance. So, they are alarmed, they proceed to blink around the place like some sort of epileptic, having some sort of magical seizure. At least 3 times they blink right in the melee range of me. Turn their heads so I would be clearly within the line of sight, but they proceed to not spot me at all. This happened before, by the way, enemies randomly going blind. Like 2 of them talking, I stab one and the other one just keeps talking for a sec before I stab the second guy too. And yeah, they were looking at each other while talking. But they didn't see anything, it's just like an animation thing. Aside from that, the game also has some sort of weird graphical issues, which are not tied to the performance. I don't know if it's because I have an AMD card and before it was Nvidia, but the first level in Karnaka became almost unplayable when I came back to the game. It's like I'm playing an anti-stealth game, because I kept getting surprised by the enemies. All the bright parts of the level are blindingly bright, and all the darker ones are just black and bleak like our future. This is further amplified in the Addermire Institute, only it's just always dark there. I legitimately had a moment and when I was just standing in front of an enemy, and he was steps away, and I could not see him until he started walking away. And apparently playing a stealth game blindfolded is extremely difficult. After those 2 levels it thankfully becomes a little more even, but yeah, that was horrendous. Thing to keep in mind is that there is no contrast settings, only brightness. Weirdly enough, upon playing again it wasn't as terrible, and I don't know if it's because I have installed Reshade and did nothing to it, or because I opened my GPU settings without changing anything and the game randomly decided to work properly after that. I don't know, but it is better now. Still hard to see, but oh well. And for whatever reason the game has a lot more shaking, meaning the game randomly wobbles around while fighting, climbing or turning or doing really any action. And going high chaos makes me nauseous if I play for too long. Adrenaline is another reason. It blurs the screen and forces you into terribly long animation if upgraded. It's a terrible thing, don't get it. You can't see anything and you can't do anything properly. Aside from that, I've had problems with the level design itself. It's definitely more complex, and I've noticed that levels are a lot more accessible, with so many more stairs and such, so the enemies can actually chase you up a building, which is definitely a plus. But my problem is how big the levels actually are, and how difficult it could be to know what's actually optional and what isn't. I think the easiest example of that is the key in the Stilton's Manor. Figuring out where that key actually is was extremely difficult. That is, when I was trying to stealth. When I saved, killed everyone and had plenty of time to look, I finally found that it was just on this pillow, or I guess blanket. And I realized that without the objective indicators I was lost more times than I could actually count. But that's just lazy design, isn't it? Objective indicators should not even be there, truth be told. The levels should lead toward the next objective, without having some contrived thing to say exactly where I should go. Besides, there was also many times when I simply needed to look through the level, explore and find things, but it was completely impossible with how perceptive the enemies actually are. It's trial and error, repetition and memorization, and I don't believe any of that applies to the original. In the first Dishonored I could go through the level and maybe miss something, but I knew where to go and I could find my own way without a problem. Again, it could be down to the complexity, and I believe it's not such a simple issue. There just needs to be more obvious ways to tell what is and isn't important, and what is and isn't a path. Right, aside from that, I've also felt problems. There were a lot of problems with the writing. So the first game is set up with a prison, then the loyalists, and then they point Corvo around. But the idea there is that every single event, every single action taken had multiple objectives behind the scenes. High Overseer needed to be taken care of because he supported Lord Regent, but he also had the location of Emily, and he also kept Martin, a fellow loyalist, imprisoned. In addition, it's also something of a trial run for Corvo to get acquainted with his new role and powers. That then leads into Pendleton's vote into Parliament and also rescuing Emily. And while that happens there's also Slackjaw and the Bottle Street Boys. Granny Rags is also doing her thing, and the player can see the results of his actions with those too. Meanwhile, in the sequel, the whole thing felt like, well, this guy looks important, so go get him. It was especially apparent with Jindosh. He only becomes relevant and mentioned after his mission, because Clockwork Soldiers don't even appear before that. And unlike Sokolov in the first game, for example, Jindosh's inventions don't even play any role until the door to the mansion. And even after that, what exactly was his contribution? It's a perfect example of telling instead of showing. Oh, what a grand inventor to surpass Sokolov! So many grand contributions! Like, what exactly? It's like we needed more time to tie everything together, because on paper the story works, even if I do hate Delilah as an antagonist. Dow DLC should have been the end, and Ashworth for something else should have been the main premise. But anyway, it's all fine-ish. It just needed more work. Intertwine everything, show the relationship, explain why Megan Foster even cares about any of this. Hell, maybe even have her tag in if you do a certain thing in a time travel mansion. Have Stilton be a much bigger figure until his appearance, so on and so forth. And where are all the side missions? That one really stings once I have noticed it. There is just no side content at all. But I would also like to mention Outsider, and that's probably the most obvious step back to me. In the first game, his voice and actions are iconic. He doesn't show much emotion, but is clearly affected by the player's actions. He is somehow both grand and very simple, because he is just a young man in simple clothes. But something about his behavior, how he just floats there, speaking in riddles, gone before realizing the meaning of anything he just said. A fascinating fellow. I actually loved going through different sequences of events and accessing the altars only after. Great example of that being the legal district in the DLC. Outsider has different lines for before and after getting rid of Timsh, as well as different levels of chaos. Meanwhile, in the sequel, I don't believe there is any difference as to what the player does, when they go, or anything else. In addition, he keeps blinking around, walking, sitting, dangling his legs. It's like an excited kid who just wants to show the player what he can do. And that voice, it's like his voice is put into a speaker under a toilet. And I'm getting ready to flush. The writing itself was also taking a step back. Look at you. Something about the way he says it just rubs me the wrong way. He's just wrong. His writing, his behavior, his everything. Even the void itself is boring. That void is just grey rocks and spikes. The original one had the strange ruins, floating whales, upside down buildings. It was like a mirror of a real world with an otherworldly twist. Even spoiling the events of the entire game during the first visit if a player knew exactly what they were looking at. Anyway, but just as what going through the sequel back then, I enjoyed it. But playing through it now, oof, it's like a 0.7 version, possibly years before release. It's just not polished enough, even if there were interesting moments like again the Clockwork Mansion or the time travel one, but the rest was annoying. Meanwhile, the original still stands strong, even if I do wish for more nowadays. I would still recommend all the Dishonored games and the DLC except the Dunwall City Trials, but the time has definitely put things into more of a perspective for me. There's also Death of the Outsider, but maybe I'll play that again some other time. Besides, I doubt my opinion on it changed very much. Even back then I wasn't too positive. It was more Dishonored and I didn't hate it, but none of it felt great. Especially because there's no chaos.